Hi, everyone. How are you? Good, good. My name's Daugherty. I'm the Assistant Vice President of Student Life and the Associate Dean of the College at the University of Chicago, and very, very pleased to see so many people here today. As you know, last spring, Campus and Student Life launched a campus-wide diversity initiative called RISE: Reflect, Intervene, Speak, and Engage. RISE represents our shared commitment to the values of respect and free expression as a university community and encourages the university community to reflect on and to challenge assumptions about the role of class, race, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, nationality, disability, and other aspects of identity. Through RISE, UChicago will examine our differences and the fundamental role those differences play in creating the rich and free exchange of ideas that is a hallmark of this university. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome Mayor Annise Parker. Mayor Parker is Houston's 61st mayor and one of only 2 women to hold the city's highest elected office. Parker's accomplishments as mayor include job growth exceeding the number of jobs lost during the recession, resulting in Houston being named the job growth capital of the nation. Fast Company magazine selected Houston as City of the Year in 2011 and 2010. Do we have any students here from Houston? Excellent. Time magazine named Mayor Parker as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Mayor Parker is a native Houstonian, like you, and lives in Houston with her partner and children. Please join me in welcoming Mayor Annise Parker to the University of Chicago.
Good evening. Happy to be here with you. I'm going to see if I can get this down a little bit. And appreciate the invitation to come speak to you. So there are some Houstonians here, huh? Too bad you can't vote for me.
Oh, wait. I'm still a resident of Houston.
Okay, vote by mail. I'm on the ballot November 5th, so. It was hard for me to get away, and I'm in quick 24 hours and heading back. You know, I give a lot of speeches. I give hundreds of speeches a year, from brief welcoming remarks to congratulations on groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings, sort of bread and butter speeches about what's happening around the city of Houston. I give big speeches, my inaugural speeches, my annual State of the City speech, but the joke in my office is that I'm invited to the opening of an envelope, and that I do my best to come if I can, and because part of being mayor is being not just running the city, but leading the city and being the public face and voice of my city. But I receive a number of speaking invitations for women's organizations, LGBT organizations, and student groups. And I fit as many of them as humanly possible into my schedule. And I'm always conscious that as mayor of the city of Houston, I am a role model for the GLBT community and for women public officials. You know, if the city's over 1 million in population, there have only been 10 women who've been mayors. 2 in Houston, which I'm quite proud of. But there's still a glass ceiling for women mayors. It's very similar to the positions of governors. You know, I represent more people than the governors of 15 states. So we're not quite as big as Chicago, but we're growing faster. Chicago's number 3, we're number 4, watch out. And we're gonna catch up. And I'm touched and honored when I'm asked to speak at events like this. Now, I find myself asking, why did they ask me? Surely they asked me because I'm mayor. Well, I happen to be doing a job that I love and for which I am paid. So, I mean, I'm happy to be part of this speaking engagement. I get asked because I did spend years as a community volunteer and activist in the late 1970s, early 1980s. I was the most visible lesbian activist in the city of Houston, and I have a long track record of community service. But I've already received a very rich spiritual and emotional reward for the work I've done as an activist. I assume that the reason that I am invited to address so many GLBT organizations is that people are still astounded that you can be a successful politician and live in a way that addresses the world with honesty and integrity in terms of who you are as a human being. Now, I would think that we would expect nothing less from each other, but it still seems to be a surprise. When I was elected mayor of Houston 4 years ago, there was a lot of worldwide discussion. I'm the mayor of Houston because I am good at what I do. But that's not the attribute that lands me in the headlines. The attribute that lands me in the headlines is that I'm the lesbian mayor of the fourth largest city in America. Time magazine named me to their list of the 100 most influential people in the world in 2010, not because I'm good at what I do, but because I'm the lesbian mayor of the fourth largest city in America. Although it is always important for me to point out that on that same list, Lady Gaga was ahead of me, and Bo Xilai was behind me. And if any of you follow the politics of China, look him up. Making that list doesn't necessarily guarantee future success. But I try very hard to be the mayor of Houston who happens to be gay, rather than the gay mayor of Houston, but it is what it is. I have to deal with the attention. But when I was first elected, I actually made the front page of the Times of India. Now the election of a mayor of Houston doesn't normally merit, it was a little bitty box, but it doesn't normally merit a box on the front page of the Times of India. And the media coverage fell into two broad categories. It was, there's a lesbian mayor of Houston. Or it was, Houston must be a mistake. How could this happen in Houston? Isn't Houston in Texas? And didn't we give the world Rick Perry and Ted Cruz? And so that was the surprise. Well, with that attention has come the opportunity to speak out for those who cannot speak out, for those who are afraid or uncomfortable, for those who actually might be in danger if they speak out. And it has also given me an opportunity to take the attention I've received and refocus it on my hometown, and to talk about a city that is not the redneck wasteland that people seem to believe that it is. It has its moments, but it's an amazingly international place, and it is, according to the last census, the most diverse city in America, with no single majority, and the city that looks like the world as it will, or America as it will, in the coming decades. About 20% of Houstonians are foreign-born, and we attract some of the best and the brightest from around the world. But enough of my talking about Houston. I really want to focus on tonight, and again, it's while I try to do as many of these speeches as I can, it's not the common speech for me because I consciously try not to be a spokesperson for the GLBT community. When I received the invitation to be here tonight and I was thinking about what I could say, I pulled up remarks I had made to the Holocaust Museum in Houston in 2010, not too long after I was elected. And as I had been writing that speech for that particular event, they, obviously with the Holocaust Museum, it was about tolerance and what we could do to promote tolerance, particularly for the GLBT community. And I have taken some of the thoughts that I composed for that speech and brought them with me tonight. Because as I was working on my speech in 2010, we were in a period of, and not unprecedented suicides of young gay men, but unprecedented in that it was the subject of a national media debate about why this was happening. And so in writing a speech about tolerance, I was going to be just sort of a very straightforward speech, talking about lessons I learned from my family, and how those lessons shaped me. I wrote some things about the nature of the job and how I love my job, but how it challenges me. But the night before I was to deliver that speech, I lay awake and thought about what it really means to be a public role model for the GLBT community. And I ended up with a very different set of comments. I have been consciously dealing with being gay since I was 15 years old. And so you don't have to do the math, I'm actually 57, so 42 years. And though I knew that I was different and probably could have put a name on it before then, that's 42 years of times when I struggled or hurt, was afraid, or hurt myself. And I did all of those things. But I'm not going to talk about that tonight because while I had struggled and I hurt and I was afraid and I hurt myself, and many, many people in my generation did so, the world has changed in ways that would have been unimaginable to me then. So with all these changes and with so much amazing public discussion and exposure and change in terms of how the GLBT community is perceived and how, I can remember the first time I heard the word gay. I can remember the first time I saw a TV show that depicted someone who was gay. And now it's almost impossible to turn on the TV and not see some gay character making quips on, a queer eye for the straight guy. Really? Not the greatest thing we've ever given to culture. But, so with all of these changes, why are these things still happening? Why are people still afraid and hurting themselves and killing themselves? And what hasn't changed? For a lot of years, and I'm now in my 16th year in elective office in Houston after being a council member and then the elected controller. But in all of that time, and prior to that, I worked in the oil industry for 20 years, and I always had a little like a Post-it note. I've had to redo it a few times over the years, but a little sticky on my computer monitor. And it has a quote from French philosopher André Gide, and it says, "It is better to be hated for what one is than loved for what one is not." Now, it's a little more harsh than Shakespeare's "To thine own self be true," but there have been times when I really needed to remember that message. And it has kept me going forward when I wanted to take a sideways path. But not everybody can follow that. So why is this happening? Now I recognize that I have had tremendous advantages in my life. And I don't mean that I've had advantages of wealth, because I come from a family of very modest means. In fact, when I was a little girl, one of my earliest memories is my dad always worked 3 jobs, and one of those jobs he had a paper route. And I would go out late at night and help him deliver newspapers, anything to make sure we had enough food on the table. But the advantage I speak of is that I had a family that loved me, and I had grandparents who absolutely adored me. And there is no greater gift that anyone can have than unconditional love. In my inaugural speech in 2010, when I first became mayor of Houston, I said the following to my GLBT brothers and sisters, and I quote from my inaugural speech, because there were people from all over the country who had gathered to see me sworn in, to see my partner. My life partner and I have been together now 23 years, so almost 20 years at that point. And people were in tears in the audience. And I said, "I understand how much this day means. I feel your excitement and your joy, your apprehension, your longing for acceptance. I will gladly carry you forward. But today is simply one step toward a tomorrow of greater justice. And when the time comes, I'll just as gladly pass the torch to the next in waiting, and I'll cheer for them as you do me. Your bravery in the face of threat, your grace in the face of insult, sustains me. Do not fear to dream big dreams. Bring your whole selves to everything you do. Face the world with honesty and integrity. The pain is worth the reward." The pain is worth the reward. But again, why are there so many who don't believe that? This epidemic of suicides tells us that that message somehow isn't resonating. In 2011, there was a study that indicates that gay teens are 5 times more likely to attempt suicide than their heterosexual counterparts. 85% of LGBT students report being verbally harassed. 40% report being physically harassed. 19% report being physically assaulted at school because of their sexual orientation. The headlines are full of stories about those who have followed through with suicide. Last summer in Des Moines, Iowa, Alexander A.J. Betts Jr. killed himself after being a victim of intense bullying at his high school because of his sexuality and his mixed race background. Last summer in New Mexico, 17-year-old Carlos Vigil reportedly committed suicide after being subjected to intense bullying from his classmates. In 2012, 14-year-old Kenneth Weishaupt Jr. took his own life after friends and family say classmates sent him death threats on his cell phone and made him the subject of a Facebook hate group at his Iowa high school. In January of this year in Oregon, 15-year-old Jaden Bell attempted suicide by climbing on a playground structure and hanging himself. He later died after being taken off of life support. Do a cursory internet search, and there are dozens of names that pop up over the last few years. And particularly, now there was a horrific incident in Florida this week of a young girl who was bullied. But for the LGBT teenagers, there are particularly young men, boys who will never be the men that they were meant to be. It does get better. There's help out there. There are loving, caring, supportive people who will nurture and sustain and love us for who we are. So why is it still happening? Well, I've been a member, actually, board member of the Houston Holocaust Museum for a long time, and we teach about the victim, perpetrator, bystander triangle. You're in one of those three roles. And we try to do programs to teach people not to be bystanders, but to protect victims from the bullies in the world. And we teach high school teachers, we teach students and we talk about a commonality of oppression. And the lesson plans link prejudices and bigotry. A bigot is an anti-Semite, is a racist, is a homophobe. But you know, it doesn't quite work that way with our community. Can we say a bigot is a racist, is a homophobe, when we are saying that about a father struggling to understand a son he loves, but whose sexual orientation he does not understand and refuses to accept? My life partner and I have 4 children. We have an African American son, we have 2 biracial daughters, and then a third daughter. When a small black child, being raised in a black family, is called an ugly name on the playground, she runs home to her parents, and those parents hear that same ugly name in their memory, and they teach her how to fight it. If an Orthodox Jewish youth is taunted for his clothes or his head covering, he tells his parents, he tells his rabbi, and they help him understand what's going on, and they give him messages to cope. Well, I'm here to tell you that faggot and sissy are still common derogatory names in schoolyards. And who does the boy who hears those words tell? Does he go home and tell his dad that he heard those words? What if he believes those words are true? What if he hasn't heard a single positive reference, even from his own family, to what he thinks, to what he knows he is? And that's the difference. As gays and lesbians, as transgenders, we're not reared in a culture that sustains us. We don't spend our formative years in the bosom of gay families who look like us and sound like us and feel like us. Even an understanding family cannot teach us what it means to be gay when we most need to learn it. We don't learn our history, our heroes, we don't learn about our past in school, in church, or at home. In fact, we're a hidden minority even in our own families, strangers in our own homes. So we hide from ourselves, we hide from each other, we hide from our families, we hide from the world. We hide until we can no longer hide. And like the boys in these headlines over and over again, too often we choose what we consider the only option, which is death. A message that I want to offer to my community is that we have incredible strength, and we have survived against very long odds for generations. But strength in isolation is limited, and the gay community standing alone is still isolated. Strength can be shared, and when strength is shared, it increases manyfold. So, how do we use the strengths that those of us who have made it through and realize that it does get better to bridge the chasm that separates us from our families, from the broader community, from the policymakers, from those who preach in churches on Sunday morning? How do we use those strengths to return from exile and share across generations? You know, as a politician, and I often attend different churches across the city of Houston, and it tends to be Democratic politicians and black churches, but there's what I call the church shuffle, where you get up on Sunday morning and you try to go to 5 churches on a Sunday and smile and wave and hope that you can do a hit. First time I ever ran for office 16 years ago, I did that, and I don't do that any longer. I think I decided it was disrespectful. So about once a month, I go to different churches across Houston and worship with the congregation, spend the whole time. And I recall one of the early days as I was mayor of Houston, and I'd been invited by the pastor to come to a particular church. And this was when the kids were still, my youngest daughter is now 18, and so she won't go anywhere with me. But at the time, she was still willing to go to church with me, and I got the girls up, and actually I think I was city controller, it was before I was mayor, got the girls up and took them to church. And we're sitting on the front row as guests of the pastor in an very large African-American church, and the prayer leader went on a anti-gay screed, and just on and on about sins of the flesh and how we were going to, the gay people were going to burn in hell. And I don't know whether it was, I was more angry for well, I know I was more angry because my children were subjected to that than I was. And so we got up and we left. We have to figure out a way to connect with those who believe that. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. We can't connect to those who, for whatever reason, believe we are wrong or incomplete or evil or whatever word you want to use, if we do not believe that we are whole and right. Gays and lesbians first will have to recognize our own worth and our own strength, and we're going to have to make peace with ourselves and the fact of our sexual orientation. We have to know that we are good and worthy and productive people. And we have to know it and know it in our core. My generation and a generation after, and certainly the generations before, cannot say that we know that and that we feel it. I mean, I'm the lesbian face of the city of Houston, and you know, I can hold my own on the Colbert Report, and I can represent my city around the world. But there are still pieces that I have to process every time I stand up and say, yes, I'm a lesbian. It's, for those of you, I'm looking around a room at a room full of young people, or younger, so many younger people. I am of a generation that still experienced segregated schools. And so I don't know that any of us who come from that generation are ever going to be, however open-minded we are, completely free to believe, and I'm a parent of African-American children, that I don't think my generation, because of what we experienced, can ever be completely free from vestigial racism. I don't believe that my generation can ever be free of the scars that we carry of our own internalized homophobia. I remember another incident when my daughter and my goddaughter lives with us too. She's now our fourth child. And they've been best friends since the second grade. And I had taken them to school to work with me one day. And we were walking through the halls of City Hall, and they were running ahead. And we hadn't had the kids very long. And the girls were running, and they turned around, and my daughter shouted as loud as she could, "Mom, when I grow up, I'm going to marry Sherry." And my first thought was to look around and think, oh, please, I don't want anybody to know. They're going to think I'm trying to turn my daughter gay. And then in the next instant, I said, you must be crazy. That sense of I am okay is so hard won for those in my generation, and again, the next generations, that my children and my grandchildren are going to have to be the ones to finally bring this issue home. But once we will continue to do what we can as we are. So the first step is our own wholeness and embracing our own wholeness and rightness. The next thing that we have to do as a community is that we must forgive our families and reconnect with our families whenever and wherever and however we can, and as much as they will allow us. And I phrase it that way because sometimes, unfortunately, we do have to let our families go. The cost of compromise is too painful and too high. And the gap may be too wide, and they don't want to cross it. But for families who love us, we have to find a balance point. There is a bottom line, and we have to be true to that hard-won core of our acceptance of ourselves that I mentioned first. But we have to be able to acknowledge our life partners. We have to be able to tell the truth about our lives. And I believe it is important to make peace with our families on what terms we can without compromising the first position. And then we have to work to enlarge those plots of common ground. I was earlier this evening at a reception for the marriage equality push here in Illinois. And I'm excited to see the effort, and I will watch with great interest from Texas. But while it will be public officials who will cast votes in your legislative chamber, those votes aren't going to be changed by ads in the newspaper or on the radio or on TV. Those votes will be changed by people who believe enough in themselves to go and speak and raise their hands and say, this matters to me and this is my life and I need you to vote this way. So enlarging those plots of common ground is about coming out and being who we are, even though it is painful to do so. And then fourthly, in the final step, I believe that we must connect back to our spiritual roots. And if it means a parallel system, the gay synagogue, the gay church, that is a start. But the goal has to be our reintegration into the mainstream. Separate but equal is not enough. And as slow and painful as the process may seem, it will be worth it. And we are worth nothing less than that full integration. Let us, as we do these things, recommit to telling our children that it gets better. And let us, those of us who are gay and lesbian and bisexual and transgender, let us put so many images in so many places that no one ever again can feel what so many of us of older generations felt, which is we are the only one. There is an African proverb that says, if spider webs unite, they can bind an elephant. Our spider webs can join together and bind up the wounds, and they can trap the elephant of bullying and hate. There is another proverb I heard a long time ago, and I will close with that. And I look forward to a conversation. The story is about a village, and every village has a bully, unfortunately. If a village is blessed, that village also has someone who is wise and caring and offers advice and healing. And in the village I'm thinking of, there were both. There was the bully and the wise woman. And the bully, as all bullies do, so hated the fact that the wise woman was respected and revered and listened to. The bully decided to embarrass the wise woman and show her up in public, doing what bullies do. And so the bully devised a riddle to test the wise woman. And the bully came up to the wise woman, and she was in the town square. And he came up, and he had his hands cupped. And he asked the wise woman to say whether what he had in his hands was alive or it was not alive. Now, of course, this was a bully, and this was a trick. And what the bully had in his hands was a butterfly. And if the wise woman said, well, it's not alive, the bully could just open his hands, and there'd be the butterfly, and the butterfly would fly away. And if the wise woman said, well, it is alive, imperceptibly, he could just push his hands together and crush the butterfly. And the wise woman was going to be wrong either way. And the wise woman looked at the bully and looked at his hands, and she pondered for a very long time. And she said, I cannot say whether what you hold in your hands is alive or it is not alive. I can only say that the answer is in your hands. Each one of us has the ability to shape the world. Each one of us has the ability to create or to destroy. The answers are all in our hands. Thank you for the chance to talk to you tonight. I appreciate it.
Mayor Parker, thank you so much for that. Just a remarkable series of inspiring words. And I'm honored to be here with all of you tonight to help facilitate the question and answer period. I know that many of you will have questions, so let's turn it over to you. We have 2 microphones positioned in the back corners, and line up behind if you would. Identify yourself and please pose your question, Mayor Parker. Do we have anybody lined up here at this point?
I don't bite much.
I want to, as people do line up, I want to come to this series of steps that you laid out here. One of the steps was we can't expect to build bridges with those who think we are wrong and incomplete.
If we think we are wrong and incomplete.
Right.
Yes.
We have to know that we are right and whole. You also talked about the importance of building bridges with family and the importance of finding a sacred space and spiritual roots. On those last 2 pieces, why are those so fundamental? How do they relate to the knowing you're right and whole?
Some of it is that we carry messages from the churches we grew up in that, and clearly I've experienced it myself, where you have a pastor preaching from the pulpit and you are hearing that as if it is spoken directly to you, and that message goes in so deeply it's hard to root out. But this discussion we're having now about marriage is not about family values. Marriage is about how we value our families. Marriage is not about faith or the sacred. Marriage is about what is the purview of the state and what is the purview of the church and the responsibility of government. And yet, the whole marriage debate around this country has gotten wrapped up in this is about religion and the right of religions to define marriage. I fully respect the right of any church to define who should be married in the eyes of the church. But the responsibility of government is about determining relationships and contract law and inheritance, and that is at its base heart what marriage is. And so we have to separate out, and I don't care how many negative messages there are about from religion, there are many of us who have chosen to, as I said in my remarks, to create that parallel system, the gay church, the gay synagogue. That's a place to heal. It's not a place to connect. But we can't do the connection until we get through the healing piece.
I want to make sure that you guys are not the least bit shy about asking questions. You have a rare opportunity here. So whether you want to go to the microphone or not, don't hesitate to raise your hand here. Let's begin with your question, then I have others to...
Parker, thank you so much for being being here. My name is Steve. I'm a first-year student at the Harris School here at University of Chicago and a native Houstonian. Raised in Austin, but born in Houston.
All right.
Hey.
My question is about traffic on Katy Freeway.
I just thank God it wasn't about potholes. I get so many pothole questions.
That's good. That's good.
Two for real questions. My first question is, do you see marriage equality happening in the state of Texas absent federal government intervention? And my second question is, in the process of getting elected as mayor of Houston, did your sexuality come up as a political tool, or was it more of a respectful back and forth? I can't say I've followed Houston politics.
My life partner and I have been together 23 years, and we adopted a series of kids out of foster care, and so we have a 37-year-old son, 23-year-old daughter, a 19-year-old daughter, and an 18-year-old daughter. And when the Supreme Court ruling came out, the first person who called me, recognizing marriage, the first person who called me was our youngest daughter, and she wanted to know if we were going to get married. And I felt really bad to say no. And the reason is that we have vowed that we're going to wait until we can do it in Texas, that we're not going to, that it is demeaning to have to go out of state and track down someone to the clerk someplace in a place we don't live to perform the ceremony. So I absolutely believe that I will be married in the state of Texas before I'm too old to enjoy being married. That said, I think the shortest distance to that happening is the Supreme Court, and I believe that ultimately our Supreme Court will have to balance the fact that right now 25% of Americans live in states where they have marriage equality and 75% don't, and perhaps Illinois will help tip that balance even more. And just as they did with Loving versus Virginia, they're going to have to step in and say, we can't have this dual system. It's not just unfair, it's unworkable. And so I think the Supreme Court will ultimately solve it before the state of Texas gets to a point where we can overturn the law. But I'm not going to give up. If that weren't to happen, I would still continue to push the state of Texas forward.
And what about the second part of his question about, as you entered public life and the race for mayor specifically, how your sexual orientation was part of that race, if at all?
It was part of the race because I was a visible lesbian activist in the 80s. I was a founding member of my college's. I went to Rice University in Houston. My college's gay student group in 1979, and was president of our gay and lesbian political caucus in the 80s. I ran for office twice and lost before I won, and I've now won 8 consecutive citywide races in Houston. I know how to win races in Houston. I don't know about any place else. But the first race I ran in '91, and I ran against an incumbent, and chances of beating an incumbent are like 3% or something, and I lost. Learned a lot. Ran again in 1995, and I was in a special election, 19 candidates, and it was a special election, it was in January, an odd time of the year, 6-week campaign. I finished 3rd out of the 19 candidates, and I lost, and I so disliked the first 2 candidates that I that I didn't make the runoff. They went into the runoff, that I curled into a fetal position for about a week and said, I'm never going to run for office again. But as I looked at it, I realized that something that was happening in that campaign, because I'd been so visibly a lesbian activist, every time I saw my name in print, it was Annise Parker lesbian, Annise Parker gay, as if that were my last name. And so in '97, I said, I'm going to do this the 3rd time, and if it doesn't work, I'm going to quit. And I was working in the oil industry at the time, and actually working for a conservative Republican oil man. But I had my work persona, and I was, the active community volunteer. And what I decided to do in this third campaign was to try to break that connection between, Annise Parker, lesbian. And so my campaign manager and I went to each of the media outlets and said, I'm going to run again. I'm going to run for city council. I'm running because I've been a civic club president. I'm a United Way volunteer in senior services. I do all of these things. By that point, I hadn't been a spokesperson for any GLBT organization in about a decade. And I said, I am a lesbian, but you talk about my opponents, about what they do for a living. You need to talk about what I do for a living. I work for an oil company. If you want to talk about their volunteer activities, you can talk about my volunteer activities. I'm a civic club president. If you want to talk about who they sleep with, if you want to talk about who I sleep with, you should talk about who they sleep with. And lo and behold, they stopped doing that, putting the names together, or the lesbian on my name. Now they would figure out a way, like in the third paragraph, to work it in that I was a former lesbian activist. But at the same time, I did something that I felt was important, and that was that in every piece of literature I put out in that campaign, and even in my ads, because I didn't have a lot of money, but I did do ads, I put past president, Houston Gay and Lesbian Political Caucus. I believed that our community deserved it, but it was also part of my resume. And I didn't have to deal with anyone saying, well, anyone else outing me because I put it on all my literature. The gay baiting over the years has taken the position, it's been, well, I'm not going to make an issue of the fact that my opponent's a lesbian. Yeah, kind of coming backwards. And I remember in the runoff in that first race I won in '97, I was out in Houston, in the Kingwood area, in the very Republican area of Houston, and my opponent and I were there, and the mayoral candidate was in a runoff, and we'd been talking for about an hour about all sorts of city issues, and some guy jumped up and he said, Ms. Parker, you've been on that stage for more than an hour, and you have never once revealed your gay agenda for the city of Houston. And you could just feel the room kind of move away from him. And I said, well, I'm talking about my agenda for Houston. We're talking about potholes and crime and trash pickup. And that is really the only time in that race that I was publicly confronted, because it was like, what could they say? I was the one telling the world that I was gay. I have had... So what I've learned is that, and the years as an activist too, I've had death threats. I've had my tires slashed. I was an out lesbian activist in the 70s and 80s, and it was a very different time. But very few people will confront you to your face. And so there were mail pieces in that city council campaign with the contrast. I'm single, my runoff opponent is married, and no known church affiliation in his church, and lesbian activist, and he's, PTA president kind of thing, and it's all, But it was mailed only into the black community. Happily, I can say that I had 75% of the black vote, and so it didn't go anywhere. But because the 20 years before that, I had been an active community volunteer, and I had built up credit in communities all over Houston. Now, when I ran for mayor, there was an attack piece that came out, and it was actually, I have it framed in my house. I really liked it. And it was a picture, of me being sworn in as city controller. And my life partner, Kathy's there standing beside me, and I have my hand, my hand raised, and I'm being sworn in by a black federal judge. And the postcard said, "Is this the image of Houston we want the world to see?" Clearly it was. And I don't know if it was like the black federal judge or the lesbian that
All right, we have more questions over here. Yes, sir.
Hi, Mayor Parker. Thanks for coming. My name is Michael McCowan. I'm a native Austinite, and my sister teaches art in Houston ISD. So, and my parents actually work a lot in state government, and I'm wondering, they've been sort of progressively more and more disillusioned over the years as the state is run by seemingly crazier and more conservative people. Instead of sort of going in the direction of maybe the rest of the country. And I'm wondering, as the mayor of the largest city in the state of Texas, you have to work with our state government and everybody else, and I'm wondering how you manage that relationship.
You know the old joke about how do porcupines mate? They do it very carefully. They do it very carefully. No, I truly, I have a good professional working relationship with Governor Perry, with Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst. Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst is one of my constituents. Unlike a lot of other states, Illinois being one, Pennsylvania, cities receive almost no funding from the state of Texas. So we are on our own, and we're home rule cities. We make our own laws, and we run ourselves. And so really the only time I interact with the state of Texas is in an emergency situation, and the governor is very responsive, and I try to be very responsive to him in those situations. And then when the legislature is in session, and it's just always a free fire zone then, and it's not, when I'm there, I am representing Houston and trying to defend the city. And so it has not been an issue. There are some things that are